The Steady State Sentinel is produced by the Steady State, a community of former national security professionals who spent their careers safeguarding the United States, at home and abroad.
Today, we continue that mission by staying true to our oaths to defend the Constitution,
uphold our democracy,
and protect our nation's security. Join our expert hosts as they interview field-tested guests whose unique experiences shed light on the crises and challenges facing our nation.
So you're listening to the Steady State Sentinel. I'm John Sipher, a former CIA officer and the founder of Spycraft Entertainment. I'm joined today by co-host, author, and legendary CIA officer Jim Lawler. And today we are joined by Denver Riggleman. Denver is a former Republican congressman from Virginia, a former Air Force intelligence officer, and one of the most interesting political voices of the last few years. He's a guy who's been inside the modern GOP, inside Congress, and inside one of the most consequential investigations in American history. Denver served as a senior technical advisor to the House January 6th committee, where he helped run data-driven investigations into digital breadcrumbs, phone records, metadata networks, and patterns, trying to map what happened before, during, and after January 6th. And then he did something that still makes people mad. He spoke publicly about what he found. And he's also worked on one of the most radioactive controversies in U.S. politics, the Hunter Biden laptop story, specifically doing data and forensic analysis to evaluate claims, distortions, and possible manipulation around the material. Right now, with the political temperature somehow getting hotter and crazier, Denver's perspective sits at the intersection of power, tech, disinformation, and accountability. So, Denver, it's great to have you. Welcome.
Oh my gosh, it's an honor to be here. Good to see you. Good to see Jim. It's fantastic.
Well, Denver, we're going to speak about all these kind of crazy things, but let me start with your time in Congress, with how the sausage is made. What's the most important thing the public gets wrong about how Congress actually works?
I would say they get wrong that there's a lot of policy debates and they don't understand how specifically transactional it is. And I think, when I first went in there, there's that saying, the first 6 weeks you wonder how you got there. And then the next 6 weeks you wonder how everybody else got there. And I think, I was... I was never in politics. John, you know me. You remember I came out of a military, started tech companies, sold 2 of those, have distilleries and make whiskey in Virginia and Pennsylvania. My wife is CEO of that. I staked her, to get started there. Now she's a very successful CEO of a whiskey making dynasty. And then, I also have a brand new tech automation company. I just finished my Series A funding line on how to automate massive data sets for aggregation, analysis, and simply predictive capabilities of data. And, I'm being sort of successful in that too. I've run tech companies before. So when I went into Congress, I'll tell you, John and Jim, I'm like, wow, looking around, it's beautiful here in Congress. And about 12 weeks later, I told my wife, what am I doing here? Get me the hell out of here. This is awful. And you just want to serve the people, but really you find out it's transactional. You got to be in the stream, what fundraising is like. And if you're not specifically on the team most of the time, 80 or 90% of the time, they start to cut you off at the Achilles. And I think that's the thing people need to realize about Congress, again, is how transactional it is.
Denver, like you, I was a moderate Republican for many years, and sadly, that creature no longer exists. When did you first detect that the Republican Party was basically sinking below the waterline?
My first meeting. So, Jim, I was I got invited to the first Freedom Caucus meeting. And I'm sitting with another newly elected member to my left. And we're sitting in the back because we're new, right? So now you guys imagine us, at that time I'm what? So you're talking about second week of January 2019. I'm almost 49, right? I've had multiple companies. I feel like I've been fairly successful. I'm above moron in IQ, I think, right? So, I got some of that going for me. So, but I worked in NSA for 16 years back and forth. With NSA, Air Force special projects, joint special projects, but also and you guys know, I mean, you work with Big Safari and Air Force Special Operations, building things and things of that nature. So I thought I was pretty good with algorithmic warfare, non-kinetic warfare, cyber, computer network operations, and how that combined with sort of warheads on foreheads, right? And how we did that. So I go into my first meeting, and there's Louis Gohmert. You guys probably know about this sterling intelligence of Louis Gohmert from Texas. Anyway, so they're debating a bill that they want to actually put on the floor. And they were talking about, and get this, the one world algorithm that's suppressing conservative voices. Now, I automatically saw the very conspiratorial nature of what the GOP was or had become, because I had some of those questions on the trail. Like, for instance, I had one person ask me why the white vans were using lasers to change votes from Republicans to Democrats in Northern Virginia, which was, they asked me if I would please address that in legislation while I was running for Congress. And then I see Louis Gohmert talking about one world algorithms. And if anybody understands math and things like that, that's not just impossible, it's ludicrous. It's mind-blowingly delusional. And my first meeting, I actually stood up and said, I don't think you should do that. I was trying to be very kind, but I remember getting the daggers poked at me or looked at me, right, as I was saying, to the point, I was trying to explain math and algorithms and different database structures and how it works. And they're just, and I said, it's just not a thing. Don't put that on the floor. That doesn't make sense. And so now when you're saying like chemtrail bills come up and stuff like that and things of that nature, I saw the genesis of that in 2019.
And so you came in the Freedom Caucus, as we remember, but then you became sort of persona non grata to them. So what's the price of saying no in that ecosystem? Like nowadays, we see these Republican congressmen openly saying things that we know and they know is not true. So is that because they can't say no? Because if you're not on the team, you're kicked off? What's the price of saying no in that sort of world?
The price of saying no is, somebody told me this. It was one of the neatest statements, but also completely right. They're like, Denver, don't get out of the current. So, and, I'm like, well, my whole life has been out of the current. If you're always striving, you're trying to be an outlier, you're trying to, you're coming from somewhere that people never thought you'd be to try to do something. And I really thought this was a service job. And, you don't want to admit that at 48, 49 years old, you go in naive, but I did. And because I thought, well, I could be a new Republican. Maybe the Freedom Caucus could be really a place where there's debate. Maybe it's really, we could make it into the Freedom Caucus. Nah, Freedom Caucus should have been called TPS, the Trump Protection Society, because that's all the Freedom Caucus was. But once I officiated the same-sex wedding in July of 2019, some of my other votes, like legalizing marijuana, other votes like keeping pre-existing conditions for healthcare, even though everybody's like, well, you voted with Trump 90% of the time. Well, you're sort of voting, that's a lot of weird small bills and amendments too, right? You're talking, sort of some stuff that really doesn't matter that much. But as I was voting no on the big bills, I started to see that I was getting, the hairy eyeball. And then once I started saying, hey, maybe people shouldn't be spouting QAnon stuff, which started in about January, February of 2020. And everybody's like, well, Denver, what is this QAnon thing? Well, you guys remember after the wedding, when I officiated the wedding, the first meeting after that in Pennsylvania County, I got completely eviscerated. It was one of the biggest showings of a committee meeting with people saying that I had betrayed Christianity and betrayed the Republican Party. I'm not particularly religious, so it was an awkward meeting. But I also had people wearing Q pens. I didn't know what they were. So you're talking, guys, August of 2019, I first started seeing QAnon lapel pins and QAnon T-shirts. And then I started looking into what it was. And so I was one of the first congressional members to even know what QAnon was as a Republican. And I said this was incredibly dangerous. As you know, John and Jim, that led to the resolution with Tom Malinowski condemning QAnon. And by that point, I'd already had the drive-through convention. I was already called the tool of the Antichrist. And after the same-sex wedding, I was accused of changing the sexual orientation of children. And we were even accused of laundering money for George Soros through our distilleries. So it was literally, it seemed like me against the world. Democrats weren't going to help as they thought it was great, so Republicans aren't going to help because they think that I've gone against Trump, right? So it really was my wife and I looking around like, holy hell, literally were alone, but I think it was the best thing I've ever done. And now I think people trust me. Even people who might not like me, they're like, well, at least that dumbass is going to tell the truth, and he's a facts-based guy. So that is helpful, I think, in writing some of the books I did and things like that.
Denver, a few weeks ago, John and I interviewed Adam Kinzinger, one of your former congressman colleagues, and I asked him if he saw any Republican candidates or Republicans in office now that he could truly support. And I'm going to ask you the same question.
Right now?
Right now, do you see any
running again?
either running or is in office that you would say, yes, I would support that Republican? Any at all? Scrape the bottom of the barrel.
Thanks for
what
the
his
question,
answer
Jim.
was.
I appreciate you. I think one person I do respect is Don Bacon, former Air Force general in Nebraska, very good friend of mine, call sign Bits, by the way. So just so you guys know. Also, people shouldn't sleep on Michael McCall. The issue is Mike and Don aren't running again. That's why I was asking, Jim, how far you want me to go on this?
Mm-hmm.
They're out. There's no way Don and Mike can continue down this line, right? And then you see people like Brian Fitzpatrick, who I thought, he's going to stand up. He's sort of wet noodleish, right? You have to be really careful what you say if you want to continue your political career in this MAGA environment. Well, I don't know what Adam said.
Just to be clear.
Well, that's where we're at. People that are running right now at zero. And I don't know if you guys know this. Adam is part of my company. Adam and I are very close, and good man. And he's obviously media. He likes being out there. A lot of media. I'm sort of the data guy, but things are crazy right now with that. But I think that Adam's correct. There's really nobody. If you are aligned with Trump, you're aligned with somebody who's been adjudicated for sexual assault, who's a felon, who has companies that have been indicted for fraud, and somebody who's simply liked to party with Epstein on a level that very hard to get over, right? As all of us as intelligence officers and looking at the actual proof and redactions, I think it's very hard to support anybody who supports that guy or is part of that team.
I think that's a fair answer. You were on the January 6th committee, and I want to ask you, when you joined the committee, what did you think you were walking into? What interested you or shocked you once you saw the data? And if you had like 10 minutes alone with someone who still says January 6th was no big deal, what's the fact pattern that you'd put in front of them?
Oh gosh, okay. This is a hell of a question here. No, this is wonderful. No. So first, when I walked in there, I thought after the first meetings that I would actually be able to build a proper fusion center. I think I walked in there expecting that I was actually running a counterterrorism investigation, and not to say that the committee didn't do incredible things, but I think Congress is ill-suited for a data-driven or metadata-specific investigation of this complexity. You have to have the funding, the experts, but you have to have the tool sets. And when I say tool sets, I'm not talking about just mental tool sets. I'm talking like actual tools and capabilities to parse that amount of data. And you also have to have the authorities. And I don't think people realize in Congress, they don't have law enforcement authorities. They only have authorities in the public trust. And it's something I wrote about in my book, The Breach, as you guys know I wrote. And I don't like to talk about it too much because it was just a New York Times bestseller. But, I think when we're talking about when I walked in there, I think I was still fighting these political headwinds from left and right that I thought I could overcome and didn't. As you know, boy, did I piss some people off. And it ended up I was correct because data is, ones and zeros make the best witnesses, I believe, as we're going forward in this direction, in this world of data. I think when you're talking about the aftermath and what I would do with somebody or what I would say to somebody who still thinks it's really still a day of peace or it was a Fed surrection or Ray Epps had something to do with it, which I saw Ray Epps' phone records. We can go into all these conspiracy theories. If I were to sit down with somebody, I would say the first question I would ask anybody is, first of all, what's your sourcing for what you know? Right. And a lot is like, okay, you're telling me this, what's your source? Where did you get the information and your source? And why did you come to the conclusion on that information? And that's when you sort of trip somebody up immediately on those specific questions. The second one the second sort of strategy is I want you to simply explain to me how every state's election system works and where they would have penetrated. Go. Right? Here's the third one. Okay, the election was stolen. Why did the Republicans still take Congress? Go. So once I do that to people, I can almost see them start to dissemble. The other thing, too, is I'm like, can I read the Meadows text messages to you? May I read the text messages from Jenny Thomas? By the way, I saw all the text messages from Ali Alexander. Also, I also saw all the phone calls that were going from rally planners and those associated with the Proud Boys to the White House. Would you like to talk about those? And why were the Oath Keepers texting Andrew Giuliani? So these are the kind of things when you start really getting into it, people start to dissemble. The issue is, though, is that the people who believe the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys were right. There is no way to bridge that gap because now you're talking about somebody who's either ignorant, immoral, right, or so credulous as not to be worth your time. So that's usually, John and Jim, how I approach it. Like tomorrow on my little show, which is, I don't know why people like it now, it's exploded a bit. I'm going to be reading selected passages of the text messages tomorrow for the people on the anniversary of January 6th.
Can you
like
say what
Don
your show is
Jr.
so people can find it?
Absolutely. It's going to be between 1 and 2. I'm going to announce it. We're trying to put it all together because I want like Tara Setmeyer to read Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like I want some people to read some of these. So, but it was something spontaneous. So it was like, Denver, you know more about the text messages than anybody on the planet. It is true. I do. I know more about the context and how it's structured or how it actually outlined the entire plan of disinformation going forward. You can see it from November 1st all the way through January 6th, the whole text message thread with everyone. So I'm going to read that. So it's going to be, it's like Breach Media. We're starting, but it's Denver After Dark, which is my very smooth jazz podcast, John and Jim. So, so we're going to be doing that. But I am reading that tomorrow. It's probably going to start in the afternoon between 1 and 2 p.m. It's going to be all over social media. I'd love for you guys. I would, if somebody wants to read Don Jr., let me know. But no, so it's just it's going to be. It's not fun. It's and people are like, oh God, this is great. No, it's actually sort of a horror story, and it's hard to encapsulate when you read a Jenny Thomas text where she has information or she has communication with Jared Kushner and she is working hand in hand with Louis Gohmert's congressional office. All three branches of government, embodied in one individual, which I think is the biggest mistake of the committee was not subpoenaing a subpoena to Jenny Thomas. It was her non-oath testimony or interview, which was worthless. So those are the kind of things that I'm going to be doing. But yeah, buddy, I just want people to understand that there's no way that this wasn't a coup attempt.
Just for our listeners, quickly, we're recording this on January 5th, the day before January 6th, when Denver's going to be doing this. So they'll be hearing it afterwards, but I'm sure they can find it because hopefully they'll get a lot of attention.
Well, if you guys want to put it out on your social media channels, feel free, but have fun.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Denver, when John and I were in the agency, John was in for close to 30 years, weren't you, John? And I was there for 25 years. And prior to the election in 2016, I neither knew nor cared what any of my colleagues' political affiliations or beliefs were. We were supposed to be nonpartisan, and it never even occurred to me to ask somebody. I assume it was like that when you were in the Air Force and when you were working at NSA. What has happened to America? Why have we become so entrenched, so partisan? What is going on?
I had somebody tell me that history always repeats, and we're in this situation, Jim, that this is no different from the know-nothings. This is no different from any period in U.S. history where you have a propaganda or a tribal machine that can take over in some way. And I push back pretty hard. When you're talking about the metastasization of radicalization, or you're talking about these type of things, social media has had such a big impact on the poisoning of the well of sort of what America is. I think, when you give everybody a voice and those voices can be magnified through specific motivations that aren't pure at all, or just grifting, or maybe even the ability to tap into credulity in a way that we've never seen before. I mean, look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, millions of followers, trying to, sort of rebuild her image, which is impossible, especially after I read the text messages on January 6th, but, almost impossible. But I think it's really that ability to self-select. I had an incredible individual. We were talking about disinformation. I was in NSA, and I don't know, this was right before I ran. So you're talking 2017, 2018, guys. He said something that blew my mind. And he goes, Den, the world has gone from multicast to unicast. I'm like, well, that's an interesting statement. What do you mean? He goes, well, back in the day, you had all your channels, 3 channels, right? You had ABC, NBC, CBS. You had the big 3 multicast, and you just go between those 3. And he goes, and now people are only on 1 channel. I said, well, I want to push back a little bit. I said, we're well above unicast. You got 1 million channels. He goes, yeah, Den. He goes, but people are self-selecting 1 channel or 1 information flow. And he goes, we've gone from less choices to less data. The more choices they have, the more you self-select into 1 barrel or 1 bin. Now, I don't know if that's 100% true, but it was a fascinating conversation. And I'm wondering, as I'm looking at these radicalization paths, when I look at Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, I look at all the individuals, right, that were out there. If you look at the Donald Win, or you go to Gab, or you go to Parler, or X today, right, which is like Parler on steroids or Gab on steroids, right, the old right-wing, social media channels. When you look at it, people self-select into that environment or into that ecosystem, and they can't get out. And I think that's why you see more hate, more tribalism, more violence. But you also have demagogic leaders, people like Donald Trump with no moral compass whatsoever that can take advantage of these new unicast self-selected ecosystems. And boy, I sounded like I used a lot of big polysyllabic words there. I apologize. But, but I think that's where we're at right now, right? Is that people can self-select into crazy. And I think they like it.
Yeah, it's entertainment mixed with political news, right? So maybe I should move on to
you can pick your own adventure, man. I mean, I could be a hero in my own movie, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And then also some people can make money off this. You get your own channel and you spin the stuff. So it's a tough time. So I want to move on to you worked on the Hunter Biden legal team doing forensic and data analysis across the whole controversy. For those who remember, for a while, the answer to anything was Hunter Biden's laptop. So you evaluated the claims about the laptop material and whether the data was distorted or fabricated. So what's the single biggest misconception the public has about the laptop, as an evidence object?
The biggest misconception, and it's so simple, but I think it makes me excited, right? The biggest misconception is that all data in the public sphere cannot be validated. There is no data that was used by Congress, that was used by anybody that had any forensic chain of custody. It is absolutely astounding. If you look at John Paul, by the way, John Paul McIsaac wrote a book. People should read it. It's insane. He actually thought the Bidens were planting giving him flowers full of poison. I mean, the guy's, right? And this is the guy that, that they're actually, so people should go find John Paul McIsaac's book. And yeah, he might make a little bit of money, but you know what? Have pity on the man. And read it and actually look at what he did. He didn't even make a forensic copy of the laptop anyway. He only made copies and gave them to 2 separate sources that went to the Giuliani and the Bannon teams. Now think about that, right? There are multiple. We had actually built out, I think, 30 or 40 different people who had their hands on the data at one time or the other with an unsubstantiated copy. So when you're looking at Marco Polo, you're looking at 4chan released by Jacob Appelbaum, and I'll go into that. There is nothing out there that was used that could hold up in a court of law. Nothing. It does not exist. And I think that's what's so amazing. So, Jim, the people that wrote the 51 that said that this looked like a Russian op, yeah. You know why? Because even if it wasn't state-sponsored, most of the people, even when you're talking about the 2020 report by Ron Johnson, right, our boy, right, in the Senate, Telizhenko, Durkash, you're looking at massive numbers of Russians and foreign assets that Giuliani was utilizing for data or for information that didn't come from any validated source whatsoever. It just couldn't. Even the whistleblowers at the IRS, nobody misspells what they misspell, right? So there was just so many things that were so ludicrous about this. But really, to me, the American public, when somebody goes, well, the laptop, first of all, data and the laptop are mutually exclusive, number one. right? Number two, if you're going to use data, it has to be forensically sound. It's not. And number three, maybe don't use foreign assets for information when you're doing a Senate investigation. So that's how I see it, guys, going forward and what I learned in that investigation.
Denver, if I recall correctly, you, I believe, more or less identified yourself as a libertarian. Maybe I may not be recalling correctly, but I used to be also a libertarian. Is there any room now for a libertarian today in today's political atmosphere? I really wonder. No.
I mean, I'm a civil libertarian. It's, it was interesting because people, Jim, people are like, Denver, you're a libertarian. I'm like, because I don't care what people do in their bedroom, I'm also pretty strong on foreign policy, right? So maybe I'm a neo-libertarian.
Well, the old joke is if you have 100 libertarians, you have 150 different political directions.
Exactly, right? But I think libertarian today, I think there's just nowhere you can be if you're pure libertarian all the way down the line, right? And there's just no way with the way that we're funneled with data and things like that. And I apologize if there's some construction going on over here. But there's just no way that you can actually, I think, funnel anywhere and get anything done if you're a libertarian, because then you start to spin off into things that don't make sense to somebody who's just trying to live day to day. So I think libertarianism is dead. I think you can have libertarian sort of lean, like civil libertarian, like I am, which I mean, I don't care if you worship a head of lettuce, right? Or, I don't give a rat's, but I certainly do care. If you have a country that's, I don't know, pushing out foreign disinformation through social media channels through Russia, North Korea, Iran, so there's that, right? So I think that's where I'm at right now, Jim.
Well, let me ask you, we've talked a little bit about your diagnosis of the Republican Party. We can talk a little more about that, but what's the biggest weakness or the biggest self-delusion of the Democrats that you see?
Oh my gosh. Great question. And that's why, I do self-identify as unaffiliated. Just to let you guys to know. I think the biggest delusion of the Democrats, again, is they keep redoing the same mistakes. First of all, I think they always want to play with Marcus of Queensberry rules when it's a goddamn, it's a bar brawl. I've never seen anything like it. They're like, you know what? We need to put on 6-ounce gloves before we step into the ring, right? And they're shooting somebody with a crossbow before they walk in there, So, and it just feels like they don't understand what the temperature is of America right now. And I also think that they go into certain types of social issues that nobody gives a rat's ass about. Or they think it's ludicrous, and I've had these debates with Democrats like, well, Denver, I guess you still are a Republican, and I'm like, wait a minute. As a civil libertarian, I don't care what anybody does or what they do, but there's certain types of factual things that have to happen when it comes to, say, sports and things of that nature that you sort of just got to say, yeah, that's probably the right way to go. And I also think as far as the economy is concerned, I think they always try to regulate themselves into prosperity, where it looks like the Republicans are trying to fascism their way into prosperity, And I think that's the other thing too, is that it's much easier, I think, to identify those that are regulate, or they still are on the tax side and things like that, than it is in the much more, I think, dangerous way of giving out favors to social media billionaires in order to get monies back for ballrooms or to make sure you enrich yourself in the White House. So I just don't think the Democrats have cracked the nut yet on being tough enough, on identifying the proper, I would say the proper policies, but also in looking where America actually is. It's stop being idealistic. It's time to be, I think, realistic on what you need to be. And if you want to be for the working people, be for the working people. If you want to be for folks to make sure they're taken care of, be that. But don't look at specific identity politics as the only politics there are. I think that's rough. And you're seeing MAGA do that with evangelicalism, right, and religious fundamentalism also. So listen, it's two sides to the same coin sometimes, but I would say that the Republicans are in a hold my beer moment. I think they're much nuttier than the Democrats right now, to be honest.
I think George Will summarized that, Denver, when he said the Dems' problem is they're weak, whiny, and woke. And there's I thought that was pretty good. Weak,
like
whiny,
America's
and woke.
HR department.
Yeah, exactly.
They are like America's HR department. And and that's a great way to say it. I mean, to be honest. And, and gosh, I supported Abigail Spanberger here in Virginia. I'm on our transition committee, and a great person. And everybody's like, oh my God, so you're a Democrat. I'm like, no, I'm sort of to that pick the person type of thing, because there's no way I was picking Winsome Sears, right? So you got to choose the best person for the job. But I'm hoping, from what Abby said and what I can see, maybe she's going to go down that line of doing the best regardless of party.
Yeah, she's a friend of ours, obviously a great person. And I think a number of these women who have national security experience, like you and Jim, take the job seriously. When you come into Congress or you come into government, you see yourself as a professional who's trying to work for the American people. And I think what's happened is because people realize that, stoking fear and creating false narratives, gets them play on Fox News and other things, they've sort of moved towards that entertainment, angertainment type of thing. And there's still a few people who want to actually do work. And I think that's the danger here is the Republicans who are into the angertainment thing is at some point, the American people are like, aren't you going to actually do any work? Like you've moved so far to the fringe that there's no way to compromise and actually have laws or do anything. And it's crazy.
I think anger and fear make you a lot more money in fundraising too than policy.
Well, that's probably true, isn't it?
You hire consultants. I remember I made a lot more money when my flyer, when my digital fundraising said, Nancy Pelosi is a socialist who wants to eat your dogs, right? Rather than saying, hey, I'm ready to bring rural broadband to Virginia. Yeah, we made a lot more money on the more hyperbolic, crazy, insane type of fundraising, outreach. And I think that's just politics, and it's a shame because the country's suffering, guys. I mean, national debt, when you look at the deficit and the debt, when you're looking at unemployment, when you're looking at housing starts, when you're looking at bankruptcies, I mean, things just aren't good. But at least we're going into Venezuela, and at least, we're building ballrooms. I mean, there you go. America first.
How about it?
Do you have any short comments about our latest venture into Venezuela? Anything that you'd care to share with us?
I think there's a distinct, I think you can have two things happen. I think you can have a successful military operation with very faulty foreign policy. And, I think that's the thing that I was looking at is, I'm reminded of Saddam Hussein a little bit, and I know we could have this discussion on a whole nother podcast, but man, it was great to take Saddam Hussein out. But if you do it for the wrong reasons, sometimes that cascading effect can be absolutely brutal. And if you don't have an exit plan, when you look at Venezuela, you're like, oh my God, have they looked at the actual size and the geography of Venezuela? And by the way, are you looking at Guyana and Suriname? Are you looking at Colombia? Are you looking at Brazil? It's just insane to me that the incompetence of this administration has led to this. And everybody's like, well, Denver, Maduro's a bad guy. Yeah, Maduro's a bad guy. But it doesn't mean that as the United States of America, where we're supposed to be, and the standard we're supposed to set, that we just go into place because of a guy's a bad guy, or because, as Trump said specifically, he told the oil companies he was going in before Congress, or that this is about oil, which he said unequivocally. So it's pretty amazing to me that that's where we're at. It's not about democracy. It's not about helping the people of Venezuela. It's about ensuring, right, that the donor class or the people that are around him are somehow, part of the exit plan because he's a lame duck. This is an exit plan foreign policy. This isn't a foreign policy about the future of the United States. So there's my short statement, sir.
I think it's fair. I mean, we should have learned from Iraq, Afghanistan. Going in is fairly easy, but how you end up on the other side. And Donald Trump is the laziest politician I've ever seen. He doesn't want to do the hard work necessary for the back end of this. So like he wants to, just do some quick bombing in Iran and say, I've solved the problem. I should get a peace prize. People should, fawn over me. He wants self-validation and he wants it quickly. He doesn't actually want to work for it. So same thing here. Oh yeah, we've succeeded. Everybody should laud me. Like, if we said that in the beginning of Iraq or Afghanistan, it would have been laughable by the time we walked out with our tail between our legs.
Like the Iranian nuclear facilities.
Yeah. It brings to mind Colin Powell's Pottery Barn thing about if you break it, it's yours.
You break it, that's right. You break it, it's yours. It's all yours. But yeah, absolutely.
So let me ask you, we don't want to keep you too long here. We really appreciate your time.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
You have some companies now that are working on data and stuff. I want to hear a little bit about that, but I'm actually excited, obviously, about the whiskey business. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, yeah. So we've been in business about 11 years. My wife's a famous, nationally renowned bourbon and whiskey maker, also gin and vodka locations.
Is that why you married her?
No, I wish. No, that's awful. I shouldn't say that. No, honestly, I don't know why she married me, John. I mean, we've been married since we were 19. So what, 36 years, So yeah, but she, she was with me in thick and thin when I deployed. You guys know, I mean, spouses that stay behind, 3 kids, pretty much a single mom, and then when I finally sold my first company, I said, it's my turn to follow you. What do you want to do? And she goes, I want to make liquor. And I knew I'd hit the jackpot. So anyway, so I said, okay, that's what you want to do. We can make that happen. So we have 2 locations. I was forced to sell my second company when I won the election. I didn't think I was going to win. As you know, John, I am the accidental congressman. And then, with this company, AI Automation, it is insurance and health technologies, but the actual automation layers we're building is actually helping with law enforcement and security based on automating video management and intelligence by linking persona data to biometrics. And our automation layers work for that too. So we have this huge technology transfer thing going where we're doing incredible stuff in insurance technologies and health technologies for doctors and patients. And we're also doing automation layers on video management and identification technologies using artificial intelligence and graph neural networks. So pretty insane. And then we just went through a really big funding phase. Just incredible what we built. We got patentable technologies now, and our service side company is called Riggleman Information Intelligence Group, and our health and insurance technology is Hoodle, Humans Out of the Loop. I was able to trademark that. We need like a Google or Twitter name. I came up with Hoodle. So there you go. So it's Rig Hoodle, depending on what the vertical is, and we are doing automation technologies that transfer not only to commercial but to security-based applications. I know that sounded crazy.
And can you tell people about what you're doing in the media sphere and about your books? So if they're looking for more information,
if they just learned about me, God help them.
If they just learned about you,
God help them.
How can they find out more?
So in media, I have my Denver After Dark podcast, which we're about to turn into The Breach. I'm on the news all the time. I have a book called The Breach, was about January 6th. That was it's very, in a humble way, to be a bestseller is really cool. It seems like it's selling again for some reason too. I was looking at it's pretty interesting. But yeah, it's called The Breach. I also had a book before that was, as you know, is famous, called Bigfoot, It's Complicated, which is about cult believers. But the Democrats, when they ran against me, thought it was about pornography. And I was hit with that, as you know, on Saturday Night Live as a devotee of Bigfoot erotica when the book was actually about disinformation. But the one time the Democrats take their gloves off, they accuse me of Bigfoot porn. And then
so if anyone's interested in that, my other podcast that I do with another CIA former colleague called Mission Implausible about conspiracy theories, we interviewed Denver.
Yeah, I'm also, not only do I go after conspiracy theories, as you know, I'm also the victim of conspiracy theories. So I'm in an incredible position. So many conspiracy theories. It's not just that, guys. Trust me. I did not know I worship Satan. Like, there's a lot out there about me that I'm like, wow, I didn't know I did that. And I have a third book that we're working on right now about 3 girls in Ukraine who helped spy on Russians during the Kherson invasion and liberation, which I've been to Ukraine multiple times, and I'm working with UTA on that, which is pretty incredible. I'm also writing a fiction book about a former intelligence cat who likes to bury bodies. That is not me. It's not based on me. I'm just going to let you guys know. So there's that. And dabble a little bit in music and help my wife test whiskey. So there you go. That's my life. I'm on X. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Substack.
Sounds like a good
and
life.
YouTube. Yeah. There you
go. Sounds great.
All right. Well, Denver, thank you for your time. Fantastic. I hope if people weren't aware of you, they will be, and they'll follow you and read your books. And we'd like to hopefully have you on again as events transpire over this next year.
It's going to be crazier than 25, guys. I think
probably
going up into the midterms, I think it might be the most potential of violence, I would say, in certain polling places around the country. And people who really lose their minds. I think past performance is indicative of future performance. So I think the conspiracy theories about stolen elections will cascade between 26 and 28 on a level we've never seen.
I worry about that as well, especially since to serve
That's
in
correct.
the present administration, you have to believe that 2020 was stolen, and therefore the notion that you'll try to steal 2028 is not actually too far fetched.
So sad, really sad.
It is too sad.
Well, on that high note, let me say, listen, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the Sentinel and follow Steady State content, and give us a 5-star review on Google. The reviews help us get this important content to the widest audience possible. Thank you for that. So stay informed, stay engaged, and join us next Tuesday for another episode of the Steady State Sentinel. This is John Sipher, Denver Riggleman, and Jim Lawler, still standing watch. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Steady State Sentinel podcast. Don't miss out on more insights and exposés from America's premier global security experts.
Also, subscribe to our Substack at substack.com/@steadystate1, and follow our social media, and join us right here next week for another exciting edition.
The Steady State is a nonprofit organization working to sustain our democracy and national security.
Join us and support our mission by visiting www.thesteadystate.org.